And now so I just found that Pingopete had released his version of RVE this morning, and he reported it as only working on Linux 64-bit. And so I've downloaded a version of it and done a little bit of pruning of it in order to just do some basic testing of it in Windows 32. So I removed, so let me go look at the file, just a quick moment here. So where is that folder? The file for it includes, I'll include links in the video here, so a link to the Eve release, because it relies on the dev version of the Eve release, which Nathan Kell pointed me to, and there we go. So his file, and a link to his, to Pingopete's download, of course. So his download includes a texture replacer, 120 gig or 120 meg, his own version of Scatterer set up for many planets, 100 megs, and his RVE at 290 megs. So in that, I just extracted his RVE because I'm happy with my Scatterer. Well, I might do a little fiddling with, look at his stuff for other planets, like Venus or Mars. And so I just copied his RVE folder and from his download. So that's what I'd suggest you start from if you're on Windows 32. If you're on Linux 64, go hog wild. You've got all the memory in the world. But so I took Pingo's download, took his RVE folder, and put it into my main folder, and just the Eve release, which I'll also link, and just took that environmental visual enhancements also into my game data folder. So that puts me here. So exact same test environment I was in before. So you can see memory is about 300 megs higher than I was seeing before. So I'd expect similar scaling if I had everything else. So this is going to cost me another 300 megs to run. There's a ton of other testing I want to do, like to see whether that 300 megs plus is including all the textures, because his RVE includes textures for all the other planets, and that I'm not using here. In my personal play, I'll usually just be at Earth or maybe visit Venus or Mars, in terms of bodies with clouds and that. But that's about it. So I might prune his a little further. I'll do some research. There's a number of tests I want to do, but I just want, this is just his download, nothing pruned, nothing modified at all. So whatever glitches or jitters we see are things that might be correctable in the future, or things I've seen before that I can recorrect. This is just his current template version for KSP 1.0.5. So let's see, were there enough clouds? Yeah, so we've got a couple clouds over. He's got a few layers. Let me show you. So Alt 0. He's got a couple of, let's see, so terrain. I definitely like the way his terrain looks. That it's kind of this kind of greeny gray. I don't know, maybe it's just what I'm used to or from using his previous versions, but I definitely like what he does with the terrain. So let's see, let's go through to not city lights. I want clouds. So he's got 2 layers of clouds here. He's got them, so the main layer is lower than I usually do. Now it causes some glitches in OpenGL that I'm aware of, so I've fiddled with this in the past and I know how to fix it. I don't think I can fix it in flight here, but what I would do is, if I wanted to fix it just in game without going to configs, I would change this altitude to higher, maybe 4,000 or 5,000, and then apply save, and then reloading the game. So that save will actually go save it to a config file. If you want to modify that yourself in game, I always just, I'm a configgy guy, so I just fiddle with the configs outside of game. And so I'll point out when that starts to cause issues. You'll start to see them around 30 kilometers up is where I usually see it. But in the meantime, you just get to enjoy the high resolution Pingopete RVE textures. That's what he is known for, using ridiculous, really nice high resolution textures. And I really like how he made Florida look here. It'll change appearance as we get higher. I'll drop the solids. All right, so around 30 kilometers, you should start to see, you can already see it, I call it pinstriping. If you've got a better, there's a industry word, I'd like to know it, but I think it's caused by aliasing or what's that, interference pattern effect. You can start to see it here now, where you're starting to see some lines at the edge where the ground and the clouds are interfacing. And it becomes more and more obvious as you get higher. So let's just look away from that for a moment while it gets worse. So I just really like the way he makes Florida look here. Just really nice. And the multiple textures. I don't exactly know how it's put together, but if it works, you know, it's the thing. If it works really well, then I don't ever really end up learning how it works. But you know, kudos there. So you can see the pinstriping starting to get worse. So my understanding, how I correct that at least, so how it relates to my understanding of it, is that it's the ground and the clouds colliding, so the engine doesn't know which one is above the other, and it doesn't just make a, you know, a categorization one way or the other for an area, so it's just kind of making that decision very strangely, and that changes as we go up and at the interfaces. So my solution to that is I set the clouds a little higher. Pingo really doesn't want to do that, which is fair, Pingopete, because wow, it gets really interesting. Because he wants the clouds more at a realistic altitude. Perhaps usually I see him build airplanes, which is fair. But I tend to set those clouds a bit higher because, you know, whether they're 50 kilometers under me or 51 kilometers under me as I'm flying up, it doesn't affect me at all. But that's how I correct this effect with OpenGL. And my recollection is it doesn't seem to happen with DX11 or DX9, although you may not be able to load up this with DX11 or DX9. See, I feel like see, the ground just looks really nice. And it looks even nicer from orbit. So let me try to actually achieve orbit. Oof, I'm really going to overshoot. Let me arc down before stage burnout. I might just hyper edit myself into an orbit because I want to show off what Africa looks like. So here's another weird glitch. I'll have to figure it out. But everything kind of seems to turn white right before we get out of the atmosphere, and that might just be the cause of my scatterer settings. Perhaps at the very top node, maybe I've got, you know, one of these values might just be too crazy. I'm not sure which, but I'm not going to fiddle with that right now. But that might be what's causing it. If you don't see it, then you don't feel that you got something wrong. You may just have something better or different from me, whether, you know, wherever you got it from. And then boom, right when you hit 130 kilometers, there we go. So we get to this really nice view. Now, I find the difference is subtle, but it like really hits you the more and more you play RSS. This really cool terrain replacement feature it does from orbit, and I find it much more obvious when you're over Africa. But you can see it in the distance of it here, where it doesn't look like it's a low resolution, you know, relatively low resolution pixel per, you know, square kilometer wise terrain. It kind of overlays this repeating pattern that doesn't look that repeating, but it's really nice and detailed. And that's really what I like out of RVE, and as well as the cloud textures are amazing, right? They don't, they're not just made of these big, crazy, funny pixels. So I'm just gonna pop myself over to get over Africa. Yeah, and you know, it's interacting nicely with my scatter and everything. So this is, you know, it's getting to a pretty high amount of memory, but I aim to try a number of things, like ATM. I don't currently have that enabled. I didn't in any of my previous tests. So, you know, prune some textures for other planets that I personally don't really visit, like Jewel, or, geez, you can tell I've been playing a little bit of stock. Jupiter. You know, other planets that do have clouds, I tend to fiddle with things like that just to keep myself well within the memory bounds, just by sacrificing things that aren't sacrifices to me. If I ever do a big mission to Jupiter, I would just add those clouds back in and substitute something else for the memory. I find this is in Windows 32. So Pingo says it won't work in outside of Linux 64, and that's fair, right? Because the way he configured it, if I had just copied everything in, I would have probably blown my memory budget. Right, so I'm going to just try tricks and, you know, maybe publish some videos of the tests and such of that. Probably by next time I test, I'll post a video. I probably will have fixed that cloud thing just by raising my clouds. But I'm going to try a number of different techniques and kind of report back through these videos, as well as the videos are very useful for my future memory, to remind me what things actually did have a benefit and save me memory, whether, you know, deleting textures for other planets or using ATM, or maybe substituting in for some even of the Earth textures that I do use, maybe substituting in slightly lower resolution versions if I can dig them out, you know, of my old installs, or ideally like from public sources like an old GitHub release of RVE or something. Because I really like these textures, but if it means I can't actually play like a full, like actually installed realism overhaul with these appearance, then I've got to sacrifice somewhere. Right now I've just got this minimal install for testing and such, but ultimately I definitely want to be playing this with full realism overhaul and everything everything that entails installed. So I'm just gonna give myself enough forward velocity to put me in. Actually, I might end up with enough. Yeah, it looks like I'm actually just gonna end up in orbit. Oh, that's nice. I'm glad I designed this craft so kind of lax, so it's pretty easy to get into orbit. It's not like it's a real payload or a real play or anything. It's just a nice little test craft. So just definitely I'm in orbit now. All right. So just coasting over the what is this? The Mid-Atlantic, I suppose. I can't see Florida anymore. To me, some of these clouds look a little blurry or imperfect, but that just might be like it's a cirrus cloud, something that doesn't have nicely defined edges. And everything doesn't have to appear hyper perfect, right? It is a video game. I'm not actually in orbit. I'm just trying to get the best I can and just making observations to help jog my future memory. So we're approaching Africa. We've got these islands, the Lesser Antilles. I have no idea. But so you can even see it there. So it's just a little island texture, but this texture is laid over it with all the detail you can see. So it really makes Africa pop, rather than being this blurry texture because Earth is huge compared to any texture that RSS can include. Just look at all the ground, the rich detail. Look at the great ground detail you see. I just don't quite know how EVE and RVE do it, but they do, in my opinion, an extremely good job. So the ground looks really nice. So this is what I would be willing to pay a few hundred megabytes extra for, to see all that nice ground texture. I could live with the lower res clouds. I might even end up substituting that, but I really like the ground replacement and the clouds. I think the clouds are even casting shadows. It's a little hard for me to tell. So my eyes aren't perfect, but there you go. So this is Pingopete's RVE, Linux only, as he said, but I'm in Windows 32, pruned to just his RVE folder because I was happy with my scatterer, because I used the very most recent scatterer, a little bit of tweaking I stated in a previous video, personal tweaking, and at some point I might put up that file, particularly if people ask for it. It's just what I thought looked good to kind of solve some of the transition issues between the, what's it called in this? It's the post-processing kind of edge versus the ground. So I was just changing those settings to make those look, the edge look ideal, not the rest of things look ideal, because the edge is what's glaring and will bother me or usually bother other people. So here we go. So my future videos, mostly I'll just be posting them so I can pay attention myself to the memory usage, because right now we're approaching about 3 gigs of RAM, so I only have 500 megs, and that's probably not enough to install a realism overhaul and everything else, or even a texture pack. So I need to save some memory if I want to be running anything like this in a real game. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Talk to you later.